Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Winged Hussar Pubcast. I'm your host, Brandon, back with my lovely and talented co-host, Mark.
I'm still here.
And today we're going to try something a little bit different on the pod than our usual. Writing is a passion, and we want to talk about something that we're very passionate about, lore. In particular, we'll be focusing on Kings of War. What is lore? How did we get involved in Kings of War? And what does it mean when you have 10 plus books in a series and trying to manage said lore?
Welcome to the Winged Hussar Pubcast. From fantasy to sci-fi to history and horror, your hosts are about to take you on a journey through all things Winged Hussar Publishing. Sit back and relax as we talk about writing, gaming, as well as interview some of your favorite authors. Let's wing it.
So,
Yeah.
You go.
Yeah. No, I like this. We should keep this bit in because it shows it's not scripted. Because everything else we've done is scripted. It's like you might as well just read the script, But here we are, shooting from the hip, making stuff up. And that was intentional.
Mark shot first.
Yeah. It's like it's not even as if we said, "Oh, geez, should we just hurry and put something together?" It's like, should we just speak naturally about stuff? Because it always happens anyway. I think with Kings of War lore Pannithor that before you first came to me and said, do you want to have a crack at... Because I was on the books as one of the authors, but I did not write in the short stories compilation. I was aware it was going on because I was working in another franchise at the time. But Kings of War, how did I knew it from... And I'll hand over to you because I'll be interested to see how you found out about it. Over here in Blighty, on the other side of the pond, there's about half a dozen online retailers in the wargame industry who dominate, who absolutely own the hobby. And if you click on any of these as I was at the time, I was hugely into bolt action. If you look at any of these websites, the big heavy hitters will be advertised on their homepage, and they'll be saying what's coming in this, that, the other. And Kings of War got a lot of love, a lot of mentions, and that's how I knew of it. But I didn't know much about it. So yeah, how did you stumble on it?
Well, I think it can be started by saying most people in the tabletop gaming hobby, especially if you have a British accent, have worked at Games Workshop at one point or another. And you can trace a lot of the big companies to saying, oh yeah, somebody at the high up at some point worked for Games Workshop. So, as I've mentioned before on the pod, Vince used to work for Black Library for a number of years. And so, we have all these connections with all these people across all these various branches at GW. And Ronnie, who is the owner of Mantic, used to work at GW when my dad was over there. And so they were friends and, they worked shows together and they went to Bugman's together, blah, 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 all the fun stuff. And when we started our company, my dad said, Ronnie's got Mantic and Mantic's got a fantasy game and I have miniatures and I think that, they want to expand into lore and we've talked about it, but I don't know where it fits in. And I said, yeah, that's great. I'd love to look at it at some point. But at the time we were doing Wild West Exodus, which was dominating all of my time. Then we went into Antares, which again dominated all of my time. So in my head, I'm like, oof, trying to fit in another franchise while also trying to do my own writing at the time, it was like, this is going to be really tight to do. So we put it on the back burner for a while. And I very much remember going to the very first Adepticon. We went as Winged Hussar Publishing, and we had just a little booth out in the hallway. We didn't even have one in the vendor hall, but we had one in the hallway. And we just had our history stuff and the Wildest Exodus books. And Vince and I went into the vendor hall and talked to Ronnie, and he introduced me, and I saw the model. I was like, this is cool. I'd love to actually be able to work in it. And then those two first franchises that we were working with kind of both went to the wayside because they both sold the rights of their IP off. So we just kind of went, all right, well, we're done publishing these. And then we switched focus. And I said, you know what, this is the time. We're going to go full speed into Kings of War. And I remember very first going into it being like, all right, so this is much bigger than either of the two franchises I've worked in so far. There's so many different factions. And I just remember sitting at one of the conventions. It might have been even Historicon. I don't think it was at Adepticon. And I just broke apart each faction, and I went through the rulebook and took all the most important lore out, and I broke it down into documents, which I still have on my computer. But I now have digested a little bit more, and I now know what to look for. But I had just pages of like just broken up lore for each faction and just all the most important things that I needed to know. And that's when I first looked at doing the anthology, I was like, all right, so I had to take all these different pieces of, like, I was the conspiracy theory meme, the corkboard meme. I was like, I have to connect this, and I have to make sure these intertwine, and I have to make sure that, you know, we're touching upon all the factions because I don't want to leave anybody out. So it was a lot. It was one of those things where I'm like, wow, this kind of looks like it mirrors Warhammer and like World of Warcraft and any type of your fantasy setting, because it's got so many different races and species and all this stuff, all these different armies and units. But at the same time, it's also different because it's got, you know, not your stereotypical units in some cases, and like, you know, humans. We've got Basileans. Oh, but wait, there's angels mixed in there too. And oh, look, they actually did the concept that GW scrapped, where it's the Trident realm people, the fish people. Wow, that's cool. And, you know, of course, the stereotypical undead and plain humans and elves and dwarves. But it was one of those things I looked at and went, okay, they've got the basics of lore. We can definitely work with them to expand this into something more meaningful and, you know, create stories out of it.
Yeah, it was. The anthology was interesting, I thought. Obviously, I had nothing to do with it because, as I said, I was working in another area at the time, but I was aware the anthology was going on. I'm going to say, I think they missed a trick. Not they. In general, you, never judge a book by its cover, right? But the anthology has got a centaur on the cover, if I recall. And centaurs are really, really boring. But that's just me. I had a chat with a dude who is very high up in the community. I think he may even be on the rules committee, not sure. But I was saying, for me, one of the big attractions of Kings of War, the lore side of it, is it's very, very Tolkien-esque. I know people say, well, all it is a subtle variation on GW's The Old World. It's like, well, hang on, both of them owe a ton to Tolkien. The entire franchise, the entire industry owes so much to Tolkien. And whilst I'm not a big Tolkien fanboy, I've tried to read a lot of it. I still haven't succeeded in completing Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. So I love the stories, but it's not the kind of writing I enjoy reading. I still recognise that it is the foundation, it's the bedrock of all of this, which is why I get very grumpy when you do get some people who start ripping on Tolkien. It's like, that's not on at all. And so we get what I was saying to this other fellow was I really like the classic vibe, the fact that you've got the good humans, you've got the sort of little bit elements of good, elements of bad humans, orcs are just fundamentally evil, dwarves are dwarves, elves are elves, all that stuff that you'd expect from Tolkien. And I'm not as interested in some of the other factions, that they don't leap out to me as much, although the counter argument to that is forces of nature are extremely Tolkien-esque. So I guess it's just not that element of it, not that side of it, which leaps out to me. Whereas this other guy said, no, I find all the human stuff quite boring. It's all of the really out there concepts that I love. And it's like, I think that's one of the cool things about what Mantic have done, is that putting a centaur on the cover wasn't a bad idea. It's different things for different people. I genuinely think this is one of those games where if you want to get involved and you have an idea of what you think is a cool army, there will 100% there will be an army for you, and you can't say that about every game. There's quite a lot of stuff I can think of out there which is really successful. It's like, actually, the sort of thing I'm drawn to, it's not really here. So the fact that I love all of the the stereotypical goody-goody, lawful good, paladin, knights in shining armour, killing bad people to make the world a better place, that is really boring to some people. But there will be something that's there for them, which I think is what came out of this conversation I had recently. Tons of factions can be a really good thing. Gameplay, very difficult to balance, but lore-wise and just franchise in general, the vibe, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points. So let me see if I can unpack some of it. As far as people who rip on Tolkien, I get the same. And actually, we've never had this conversation, so I'm interested to see where you go with it. But I get the same feeling when people rip on the Beatles, where it's like, when I was younger, I didn't really fully appreciate the Beatles. My dad loved the Beatles growing up, and I had a appreciation, I guess, to a point. But when I got older and I really listened to their catalog, I don't agree with a lot of their songs being, fantastic, but I do appreciate what they brought to music. And there are a lot of songs I really do enjoy. But I think when people can't appreciate what has come before, it's hard to appreciate and see the nuance and where things have gone. You have to be able to say, okay, well, I don't necessarily like this or it doesn't hold up nowadays, but it did lay the foundation for what has come.
Yeah, I could go on. I could unpacking the music. I could go into a real rabbit hole on this, but yeah, Beatles got a ton of respect for. It's not my kind of music, but all of the music I am into has its bedrock in the Beatles, which is to say, they didn't necessarily invent it, but they popularized drummer,
Right.
bass player, one gusting two guitars, vocals, and having that kind of format to a band. So much popular music, rock music, so much of it comes down. There's even a claim, which I'm not sure I agree with, but Helter Skelter was the birth of heavy metal because they were distorting the guitars on it. And for me, Tolkien, it's not just the writing, it's where the writing is born from. This is a guy who was a platoon commander during the Battle of the Somme and who saw an awful lot of carnage, misery, death and destruction, and came home in an entirely broken generation of people who went through stuff that the vast majority of people today can never, ever, ever begin to comprehend. So what did he do? He wrote books about hope. He wrote books about the little guy, the Samwise, standing up against all odds to do the right thing and that courage will overcome evil and adversity. So when people then say, oh, Tolkien's writing is very dated and immature, no, it's not. It's not. That's someone who went through something absolutely terrible, and instead of coming back with negativity, came back with positivity and wrote about friendship, hope, and doing the right thing and courage. And so I don't have a bad word to say about Tolkien. I really don't.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think that's what you and I can agree on, that we try to promote in our writings, is you don't necessarily want the Mary Sue or male equivalent of a Mary Sue being the one who can not be stopped, is invincible. Gary Stu. You don't want Mary.
I believe it's the industry. Yeah.
We don't want Mary and Gary Stu running rampant in a novel, just being the Superman of the universe. That, oh, Rey Skywalker, you have the power. No. You want to be able to send a hopeful message. And, the protagonist should overcome trials in order to get to that point. And at the core of who they are, the protagonist should be a good person. It's kind of a taboo subject, but I do believe in redeemed villains. I love the concept. We've talked about this before, but I love the concept of anti-heroes, of the guy who just was on the wrong side, but all of a sudden something changed, and usually it's from working alongside the protagonist to change their viewpoint to become now on the side. And maybe they're not doing things the right way, but that's what makes them so cool compared to the protagonist, because you've got the duality working alongside each other to bring about a hopeful change, a hopeful ending. And again, a lot of my inspiration, Dragon Ball Z growing up, that every single villain in Dragon Ball Z, for the most part, works with Goku at one point or another. So, it's that whole thing of, I believe you need to have the moral compass of a good character somewhere, and then you can plug in other people around them. But I think it shines the strongest when you have the protagonist be that center of hope. He or she does not have to be the world's strongest, fastest, smartest, most competent. They could be your ordinary Joe Schmo living in a world living in a bleak world, trying to find a hopeful future. But I think you need that shining beacon somewhere to say there is hope in even the darkest of times.
Yeah, and the way that hope is done, because I know you can say, well, what's a shining beacon of hope in a really popular franchise? You've got Space Marines in 40k. So what's their shining beacon of hope? Well, it's certainly not being good, but it is saving humanity by... I think we've touched on this before. I remember a documentary years ago saying, what is a hero in literature and movie? And a hero is something who does fundamentally bad things to achieve a good outcome. And whether that's, it's a definition. It's not the definition, obviously, it's a definition. And if that's true, you can certainly apply that to things like 40k, where every faction is a variation on, are they the bad guys? It's like there's no clear classic good guy. And that's the grimdark setting. And there are grim and dark areas of Kings of War, definitely. But I'd say overall the vibe is not. And that's one of the things I really liked about it. Because as successful as 40k is, and there's people who are absolutely obsessed with it, it's a winning formula. It's not for everyone. And I much prefer the lighter... The stuff that's, I suppose, has a more of a direct line to the Tolkien message. That when you look at characters like Aragorn, who it's just like, well, you could accuse that character of being a little bit of a Mary Sue. He's very, very good at absolutely everything. But it's done with... So first of all, he knows he can't take the ring. He knows he can't do it. So someone else has to, and someone else has to guard the person who takes it. So it's not all about him, but he is an ideal. He's an unrealistic ideal of leadership of a king, but in such a wonderful and inspiring and hopeful and positive way that I think he's an absolutely fantastic character.
Absolutely.
It's not.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's not the sort of character I'd like to write. I prefer to write characters who have flaws, who screw up, who have vulnerabilities, who whatever it is. But I think as a character to read and to watch on screen, particularly good old Vigo, the way he portrayed him was just smashed it out of the park. There's a reason that everyone's heard of Lord of the Rings. It's yeah. So. But queuing that back into Kings of War, I mean, were there any factions that stood out to you? You've sat down, you've been through all of them, you've made what sounds like a serial killer level of preparation on a corkboard. Which faction stood out to you as the most interesting before this whole project kicked off?
I will answer that question, but I just want to touch back on something really quick. I love the fact that so many of the podcasts in the community are now delving into lore, because it's so cool to be able to have people weigh in on their opinions and be able to look at the things that both us and Mantic have done and contribute their opinions to. But I think the cool thing about why we even discussed doing an episode like this is because we are directly involved with conversations with Mantic. So we have answers to certain things that other people don't have. So like you said about the Grimdark thing, we've been flat out told Kings of War is not a grimdark setting. There is room for hope and change. So I think that's a cool aspect to be able to say with 100% confidence that it is not a grimdark setting. That is fact. Just neat little tidbits like that. And if you guys want to see us do more episodes like this, let us know. We might still do episodes like this even if we don't get your opinions, because we can do what we want. Yaha. But I do like the fact that we can kind of throw in our opinion to be like, this is what we have been directly told. It's never had to come up in conversation, but because we're talking about lore, this is what the facts are. But to circle back to what you just asked me, truthfully, I was drawn to the Basileans. Maybe the Brotherhood to an extent, but Basileans were the ones I was like, yep, those are the ones I like. As a 40k player, I was an Ultramarine player. I know, basic, but there's something clean about the color and the look, and I don't know. In my mind, I had them. My Ultramarines were very good guy oriented, in the sense, not necessarily lawful good, in the sense of we must expel all chaos. It was kind of like they want to make This is very anti-40K, so I apologize for what I'm about to say. They want to just make the universe a better place, and they want to be able to work with other armies to be able to make the world a better place. And, that's the cool thing about tabletop gaming is everybody can have their own headcanon. It doesn't have to necessarily agree with the overarching lore. It doesn't have to fit in and change the plot, but you can play your games and have your headcanon how you want. So,
unless you're playing Basileia, if you listen to this and you're playing Basileia, you must comply to what I've written. Other than that, I agree.
It is true. Mark is the official Basilean spokesperson. So,
for
Mark,
anyone
get your
from
whip
Mantic
ready.
listening, just to clarify, we are joking. We know we're not. We know we're not. We know everything has to go by Mantic HQ. We get that. Okay, we know.
Disclaimer inserted.
Yes.
So, making a transition, I always look at these games and I say, all right, who do I see as the quintessential good guys and who do I see as the quintessential bad guys? And, you can make an argument the bad guys are Forces of the Abyss, the Undead, nowadays even you can say the Night Stalkers. But when I looked at it from the approach of how am I approaching this, I said, okay, the good guys are going to be the Basileans. Everybody has shades of gray and can fall in different areas, but I see personally the Basileans being the good guys, and that's the force I resonate with the most. That's the only Kings of War models I actually have. I would love to say that they're put together, and I think maybe 3 minis are, but they are far from being put together. Little segue real quick, as I said to Mark, I have about 120 of my Marvel United minis painted. I actually wrote it up yesterday. I think I have 112 painted. I have 256 left to paint. So that's my goal in the next, I want to say year, but it's probably realistically going to be 2 or 3 years. So someday, maybe when V5 comes out, I'll have a Kings of War army at least put together. But anyway, so cycling back, so I have see the Basileans as that good force. So then I saw the Forces of the Abyss as the bad force. I look at it kind of almost in a biblical sense of, okay, you've got your angels and your demons. Well, kind of hard to get more good and more evil than angels and demons. So that's how I approached it, and that's why I looked at Basileans as the main one that drew me into it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I've ended up with the Basileans, which I don't know if you remember, that wasn't the plan. I came up with a plot for a novel, which was never supposed to be the first novel for Kings of War.
Yep.
I say the first novel. We all know there were some other stuff that came before the Winged Hussar team, which I can dive into at some point, because certainly one of those I tried to build on. I read some of the other ones, but certainly the one about Mortimerus and stuff like that I tried to build on. Anyway, but my original plan, my original synopsis I sent to you was a Brotherhood story. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you recall. So,
absolutely.
That went across to you, and then when we engaged with Mantic, the answer came back, because they knew where that faction was going, that faction was going to get split in 2 and was going to be a theme army under 2 of the sort of chief primary factions. So they said, well, if this is going to be one of the opening 3 novels, no, not yet. We don't want to be pushing Brotherhood right now. It's about to see big change, and we want to push the primary factions, which made a ton of sense. So I got told, rethink it. So I went across to the Basileia side of it, and they leapt out to me as the second one. I suppose the thing I didn't like, because I always played Dark Angels, and Dark Angels, back in the day I played 40k, were a little bit more no frills. They were a little bit more Spartan in their all of the stuff of look how much gold bling and artificer armour and look how ostentatious I am was other chapters. I think now with the way the miniatures are, they all are, but there was certainly a stage where Dark Angels, that wasn't the vibe at all. And that was why Brotherhood, I suppose, leapt out to me, and the whole monastic religious fighting order thing, again with Infinity, which is why I kind of wrote what I wrote. But here it was no, you're not going to do that. Okay, what's the next best thing I can do? And again, it wasn't specifically with a 40k mindset on. But when I did play 40k, Space Marines were the poster boys. And if you saw any posters, that's what it would be. If you saw them advertised on the front of wargaming magazines, it was very, very, very often Space Marines, 40k box art, all that stuff. They were front and centre. And if you look
Absolutely.
at the Kings of War rule books, there was a time where when you turn and look at the title page, it's a paladin's helmet. And that paladin helmet keeps cropping up again and again, that imagery. And it's like, these are the good guys, these are the censor, these are, in my mind subconsciously, these are Mantic Space Marines, the paladins. So that was kind of what I went for. What if I went for something like that, but I want to do it very, very differently, in that I don't want them to just be fanatical and one track minded, that it's just kind of for the emperor and all that stuff. That it's, what if they have lives? What if they have aspirations? What if this is a temporary part of their life, that after 10 years of being a paladin, you go, okay, I've done that, I'm now going to go and do other things. This was a means to an end. It was always supposed to be a temporary thing because I have other aspirations in life. So yeah, I thought that might be an interesting place to go, and that was kind of that was why I pitched that faction and started off with it, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, interestingly, when you bring up the Brotherhood, we got a lot of submissions for the Brotherhood, and I don't think we got any for Basileia, which was kind of weird, seeing as how after that, the first 3 novels all involved Basileia in some form. So it's interesting where things go. And it kind of leads me to my next point of trying to make sure factions get covered. And that's kind of the reason why I tried to make sure every faction was involved in the anthology. So, for those who don't know the inside scoop or are blissfully unaware of what goes on behind the scenes, I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit. When we get a pitch for a novel, that novel doesn't get immediately put to the top of the pile. The author doesn't have a manuscript written in a day. Usually what happens is an author will come with a pitch. They'll say, this is what I have planned. This is what I'd like to do. I look at it. I see if it fits our standard. Yay, nay. Pass it over to the IP holder, in this case, Mantic. And I say, this is what they want to do. Does this look good? I get a yay, nay. Send it back to them. If there's changes that need to be made, author makes said changes, and then we do the dance again. If everything looks good, we move on to issuing a contract. Vince has to get the contract drawn up. Author has to sign the contract, back and forth. Now, mind you, what I just said in the past 2 minutes can take upwards of a month just to get everything situated. Then after that, said author has to write the novel. And Mark, a novel does not get done in like a week's time, does it?
Oh, good gosh, no. No. And I think that's submissions, and this we sometimes say, I'm going to use the word unkind things about first-time authors, because being a first-time author sucks. It really does. It's really, really, really difficult. But there's one thing you can control in the whole thing, and it's the attitude. But I think some first-time authors have turned up, particularly I think within Kings of War, with a great idea, and have then written 20,000 words, and that's a lot of words, that's a lot of words, and then had the realization that at 20,000 words, you are 20% of the way to your minimum contractual word count, and have given up. I think over the years, I mean, what's it been with Kings of War now? 8 years we've been doing this? How many first-time authors have we seen who have come up with, here's a great pitch, that's great, prove you can write. Here's a sample of my writing. Wow, you can write. Prove you know the franchise. Here's my digging. Here's my knowledge. Great, you're away. Go for it. And then months, if not a year, if not 2 years go by, and it's like, yeah, I'm breaking contracts. This is way more difficult than I thought. There's, but you've seen that more than me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Kings of War. It's across the whole board. It's issues that you run into, and it's, life also is a factor in that. And, there's never any bad blood. I mean, stuff happens, life happens.
Yeah.
But then, as you say, it takes a while to write said novel. It could take months. It could take a year. So then after that point, we have to see where it is. Obviously, we schedule a novel. We try to go in with positive mind of, okay, we're going to schedule the novel for X time, for X month in X year. And it needs to be done, final draft by then, which means the author has to finish several months in advance to get it to me. So it's always we look at it as this is where it needs to be, but it doesn't always get to that point. Sometimes we have to delay that in order for the author to actually finish writing it. Because then once they do that, then it comes to the editor. It depends on where it is in the schedule, because for a variety of other factors, it could be at the top, it could be at the bottom. In this case, with Mark's novel, with Steps to Deliverance, it was supposed to be the second or third novel that we did in Kings of War series. It ended up being the first because of, moving schedule. Then I have to go back and forth with the author and edit it. And mind you, this is also like 3 solid reads looking for punctuation, for continuity, for lore, for spelling of common terms, spelling of uncommon terms, all sorts of different things. But we look at it like Mark, you can vouch for this. We look at it at least 3 or 4 times under a microscope to make sure that we're hitting all the right areas. And then after that, it goes on to layout, which is a whole nother person who has to actually physically lay the book out to make sure it meets the right specifications for a physical book and an ebook. Then after that, it gets reviewed to make sure that everything looks good in the format. Then it's got to go on to marketing and Simon Schuster and all that to make sure it gets the proper marketing to promote it. And then it goes to print. And then you see the novel. So that's why sometimes these novels can take a while to come out. And that's why sometimes the schedule gets shifted around. That's also not taking into consideration cases like in our Pannithor series where Mantic has said, we'd like to see this novel about this specific thing, but it's got to be under a tight time frame, a la what we did with Pius. Pius was a very quick contractual obligation that we put out at record speed. All kudos to Mark. And we had to zip it into the schedule when we had to bypass certain things like marketing, which, affects the novel in a different way. So there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that, we don't necessarily talk about because there's not a point to talk about it. But where did all this go? Where was all this going? The fact is, I put all of the factions in the anthology because of that long timeline of things. I didn't know when we were getting to what novel when. So then you see people say, well, there's so much Basilean in the first 3 novels. It's like, well, yeah, because this was all contracted a long time ago. And there were other faction-specific novels that were supposed to come out along the way that there were various issues why they didn't. So then we saw Basileia, we saw Trident Realms, we saw Forces of Nature, in smattering in there, we also saw Forces of the Abyss, Undead. Now we have dwarves. We had 2 dwarf novels back to back, and I was talking with Mike Rossi about, his next dwarf novel, and we're not doing that right now because Ben's got his series with another dwarf novel. So it's like, all right, now we oversaturated Basileia. We're stepping away from Basileia. Now we got to be careful not to oversaturate dwarves. So within this whole concept of lore and where you go as a series, it's tough to try to make sure that you're hitting all the right beats to make sure you are spreading out the world and developing the world in a way where you're hitting as many factions as possible.
Yeah, it's I think most people get it, don't they? You do see the occasional comment, which I've had in multiple franchises of, okay, so here's the first novel out. Oh, right, it's not my faction. Yeah, it's not. There's, how many factions are there in Kings of War at the moment? I think there's 487. So it might not be yours, but yeah, of course you want to spread the love amongst all the factions because anyone who is going to buy the novel has an interest in the lore. So if you've got an interest in the lore, as a team, we want to support that area, and we do want to do different things. I think it's funny as well, coming back to the first-time author, the sales pitch, particularly for Kings of War, because I've had, obviously the vast majority come via your good self, but some have come via me. So you've written Basilean stuff. Okay, I've got an idea for a Basilean novel. Cool, let's hear it. And how many times, and it's like, please, don't submit this. Right, it's about a paladin, it's paladin/sister who falls to undead/the abyss. I'd say is the most common sales pitch we've had for any franchise. Is Basilean paladin or sister falls from grace and ends up undead or abyss. And okay, so let's look at Steps to Deliverance. A Legion captain falls to the abyss, where he bumps into a temptress who finds out later on was once a sister who fell to the abyss. And then Ben Stoddard came along and wrote about an entire convent of Basilean sisters who fall to all sorts of stuff, really. I mean, and it's like, okay, so I regret doing it in that first one. I didn't realise how cliched it was. Ben had already got his plan. We were writing parallel at the same time. And I think we'd both already committed to a plan. By the time we were exchanging notes and going, oh, okay, there's a bit of similarity here. But it's done now, it's in the past. And I think let's bombard Brandon with your sales pitches, please. Just not that one, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Just not that. Anything else, just not that.
Yeah, it's tough now. I think we're almost at 15 books in the series. And there's a lot of lore to cover between those books. And there are times I have to go back and say, all right, just for the record, I am also trying to juggle the memory of all of these books, all the Infinity books, all the books we've worked on in the past. My brain is so filled with if you see a file cabinet in those like cartoons where you open the drawer and it just stretches endlessly, that's my brain with tabletop lore. I have so much information compacted into my brain that I just pull out at random times. I'm like, oh wait, I think this means this. I think this means this. And I'll even be looking at a draft for a second time, something I didn't catch the first time. I'm like, wait, I should probably research this to see if this is correct. Oh yeah, no, this is wrong. It needs to be blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, where does it all stay? We're at almost 15 books in the series. We gotta be more at this point, but I don't feel like counting. And I have to refer back to other books constantly to be like, all right, did we touch on this in this book? I know that this area was touched on. Okay, no, it wasn't touched here. Okay, this area was touched on here, so now let's go back. Even in books that are parallel to each other. So let's look at Honor's Price and Pride of a King. Those books were being developed side by side about the dwarves. And the authors, Ben Stoddard for Pride of a King and Mike Rossi for Honor's Price, worked with each other to develop the lore of the dwarves. They had mostly free reign by Mantic. They had everything they created had to be run by them, but they did a lot of nuanced things that will see the light of day soon. Didn't necessarily see the light of day in the books, but we're working on something in the near future where you can see some of the stuff that they developed. And from the point when Ben finished his book, sent it to Mantic, or sent it to me, and I verified things with Mantic, and then I got to Mike's book, there were even inconsistencies between that, and they both worked together to develop the lore. I had to go back and be like, wait, this doesn't make sense with this. And there's so much things to marry up, and a lot of the minor details you can very easily overlook and say, whatever, that's not a big deal. But there's a lot of big details, too, we have to make sure. I will, again, pull the curtain back a little bit. The Edge of the Abyss anthology, I'm mostly going to say that falls under the Star Wars Legends of we will say what's canon and what's not canon, because there's a lot of things in that anthology that aren't necessarily canon. Nature's Night story, 100% canon. That ties into the novel. The Trident Realms story, that is not canon, unfortunately. And the reason being, we have male naiads in that story. There are not male naiads in Kings of War. Now, granted, this went through the author's eyes, my eyes, Mantic's eyes, and none of us caught the fact that there were male naiads, nor the author I knew there was going to be, no males in the naiad army. Because, yes, traditionally, naiads are females, but there was nothing to reference that in the existing lore that there was no males. So, because there was nothing to say there wasn't, we assumed that there was. So it wasn't until we got to Drowned Secrets that Mantic told us, well, there's no such thing as a male naiad. And how we found that out? Because Ben also wrote about a male naiad. So we had to be like, oh, okay, well, then the Trident Realm story is not canon anymore because there's male naiads in that. So
to be fair on that, because being one of the culprits involved with Nature's Night has a large element of damage recovery. I mean,
yes.
So that story in the anthology, it is canon, but it's only canon because Nature's Night turns it into the technique of the unreliable narrator. Mm-hmm. So it says that story you read with all of the law breaking in it, because there's a healthy smattering of stuff which is wrong. It's wrong because the narrator is unreliable. And that gets revealed through Nature's Night, where you find out, no, you read that, here's what really happened. And then it makes sense. Which was a genius idea. I think it was mine. It might not have been, actually. I can't remember. I know there was 4 of us having all manner of talks at the time. I remember that coming up and I was either exceedingly impressed with someone else who came up with it, or with myself. But whoever it was, well done. But
I want to say it was me, but you know what? For the sake of this conversation, I'm going to say it was you. And I was going to say that book is still to this day one of my favorite in the Pannithor series because of what we did with it. So regardless, that's one of my top favorite books.
Yeah, I enjoyed looking at that story, and it's similar to Mantic looking at it. You can't have male naiads. I remember looking at that and just going, "This, it was Basilean stuff, wasn't it? That it was just like it would be the equivalent of writing a story about a space marine and giving them a lasgun and carapace armor, or a flak armor. It's like that. That's not right. That is not what they wear. It's not how they act, etc." So we did some stuff and got it all fixed, and I think we've had a lot of interest in novels. We've gone in a lot of different directions. We've covered a lot of factions. There's some factions, I think, which are major players which haven't been covered as much. The elves leap out. There are elf characters. But in terms of a elven home, deep dive into that southwest corner of the map and how it works politically, socially, all that sort of stuff. How the military works in terms of if you field an elf army, how do these people interact with each other? What's the rank structure? All that stuff. We haven't really done that. So there are some stuff still to come, I think. There's some holes to fill in. But as we're drawing sort of tight on time and drawing close to the end, I suppose my plea on that would be mention it in the comments section of above this, or get in touch with us and say, what do you want to hear more of all these novels? Because there's over a dozen now. What do you want to know? What director's cut do you want to know? What do you want to know that got cut that didn't make it through to the end, or where it could have gone, or what inspired what character, or which factions haven't we covered that you'd want to see covered? That sort of stuff. Because we can very easily just chuck another episode on and talk through that stuff.
Absolutely. And to piggyback onto that, we love to hear from you guys. We hear occasionally, but I know there are listeners. So please let your voices be known. Let us comment on these episodes on Facebook, or where's that main platform we upload on? Podbean. If you're listening to this on any music platform, this originates from Podbean. So if you want to let your voice be heard, go to the Podbean website and just comment on the episode. Or like I said, go to our Facebook page and comment on it. Send us a message. Get in touch with Mark and me personally. Most of our listeners know us and how to get in contact with us. So let us know your feedback. We'd love to hear more. All right, Mark. Well, I think that wraps up our discussion on Pannilore, our teaser episode. I think we're definitely going to revisit this subject.
Yeah, this is the intro, isn't it? This is the scrolling text at the start of a massive discussion of 8 years we've been tinkering with this. You a lot more than me. And I think there's tons of episodes in here for when people say what they want to talk about, or when the two of us just decide, no, I don't care about that. We're going to talk about what we want to talk about.
Very true. Today's episode is sponsored by On Military Matters, your source for new, used, and out-of-print books on military history, wargaming, and modeling. Check them out at onmilitarymatters.com and make sure to sign up for the weekly e-flyer. That's onmilitarymatters, all one word, .com. Well, as always, listeners, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate your valuable time. There's lots of podcasts out there, but we appreciate you choosing us. I've been Brandon.
I've been Mark. Click like and subscribe, like the cool hipsters on YouTube say.
And we'll see you guys in the next episode.